every time. When you think about him, you think about some of the things he said, but I think about more how he says it. In March, he and Pete and I were at a panel discussion at South and Southwest, and we spoke, and everybody came to hear him. But we understood, and he was able to articulate the importance of every person in this country. Whether it's a small town in West Texas or a small town in Indiana, whether it's a large city with our urban problems, he believes in believing in each person to make sure they feel they're believed in. You know, leaders must honor the uniqueness in everyone, and Pete gets that, not as a political strategy, as a human being and how he lives his life. He's lived his life because he's a man of faith, but he's also understands it because he's a mayor. He's a mayor that has to unite versus divide, has to bring everybody along. It's remarkable to see the people he represents, the folks that voted for him throughout the state of Indiana when he ran. Us know how to lift everybody up, and that's what this country needs. As President Obama told us time and time again, we are the United States of America, and we must do that, uniter. So I'm so excited about hearing what the great mayor of South Bend, Indiana has to say about us. And most importantly, it gives me hope for the future of this United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Good job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor. Congratulations on your award. I'm content to be the lesser of two mayors this evening. And you are very fortunate this election eve to have in Mayor Rawlings somebody who I hope you know is very well respected around the country, the community that has formed of American mayors, for understanding not only the policy dimension, not only the management dimension, but also the moral dimension of that job. So thank you for everything you've done to lead the city of Dallas. Thank you to the party for the county party is the backbone, and in many regards, I think are the unsung heroes of democratic politics. So thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for this invitation. Gracias de su invitación. Y les agradezco de su apoyo por el Partido Demócrata. My name is Pete Buttigieg. They just call me Mayor Pete back home because it's a little easier. I'm in my 8th year, and I'm running for President of the United States. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about why. And I'm particularly pleased to be among fellow red state Democrats. I'm someone who's trying to remind everybody that there's more to Indiana than our vice president. And you know that there's a lot more to the state of Texas than what you might see in the political commentary that sometimes comes our way. And I think that's important because we have an opportunity right now to respond with a different kind of vocabulary, not different values, the values that make us Democrats, from our commitment to economic justice to our belief in racial and social fairness, do not need to change one bit. But we do, I think, in these redder states, learn a better vocabulary for making those values better understood and understood by more people. And I believe that is especially needed at a moment like this. I think even now we might be underreacting to the seriousness of this moment. And I don't only speak of the current occupant of the White House. I speak of the conditions that made it possible, the causes of which he is a symptom. Because under ordinary circumstances, a figure like that does not come within cheating distance of the Oval Office. We're at a moment of profound social and political and economic change. And the question of our time is whether we can make those changes work for us before they overtake us. That is the premise of my unlikely campaign. And I admit that it's a little unlikely. And yet some of the very same things that made it seem unlikely when we first got into this are the things I believe that have helped propel us into the top tier of presidential candidates. The idea, for example, of a mayor on the national stage. Because mayors have to get things done. You will never see a city government shutting down because of a policy disagreement. It's unthinkable. Because, cities deliver water and you need water to live, so we just have to fix it. And I believe we would be well served to start making Washington function more like our best run cities and towns rather than the other way around. It was unexpected to have somebody emerge from a state like Indiana, one of those red states, from an industrial community, no less. A place that was brought to its knees by the departure of auto companies a generation ago. But it's precisely from communities like ours that I think it's so important for people to hear a different voice. Communities, be they industrial or rural or urban, where young people grow up taking on board the message that the only way to succeed is to get out. And we know that that created the vulnerability that this president preyed on with that message of Make America Great Again. Because that message says that we don't have to change, that everything can be stopped and turned back, and that we're going to dredge up greatness out of some impossible past. But the story of communities like ours that have faced with honesty the fact that the future will not and should not resemble the past is a powerful antidote to the idea that our part of the country can only be reached through the politics of nostalgia and the politics of resentment. Because we know there's an alternative to that resentment and nostalgia, and it has shown us that there is no such thing as an honest politics that revolves around the word again. Rather, it is about focusing on the future. And that's why the third unusual attribute that has propelled this campaign is the idea of generational change. I get that I don't have quite as much silver hair as you might typically expect of a U.S. presidential candidate. Although I can report that I get a new one every time I open up Twitter. But I also believe that it's time for this generation to put forward new leaders. A generation that was in high school when Columbine happened and has grown up as a school shooting generation. The generation that provided the bulk of the troops after 9/11. A generation that stands to be the first in American history to earn less than our parents unless something is done to change the trajectory of our economy. So let's do something to bring about that change. I know sometimes they say that we Democrats struggle to define our values on a bumper sticker. That we don't know how to reduce what we believe in into a few words because we're a little bit more nuanced. Not everybody views politics in a nuanced fashion, but sometimes we do. But I think we can do it. Because I think our values actually boil down to some pretty simple ideas, like freedom, security, and democracy. Now, I'm particularly keen to have Democrats get back into the business of talking about freedom. Because we've allowed our Republican friends to monopolize the idea. They care about a certain kind of freedom, freedom from government. And that's fine as far as it goes. But we're the ones who get that there are more things that can make you unfree than government. Your neighbor can make you unfree. Your cable company can make you unfree. There are a lot of things that can make me unfree, and you need good government to make sure that doesn't happen. You're not free if you are unable to start a small business. Lively room tonight. Thank you. As I was saying, you're not free if you can't start a small business because you're afraid when you leave your job, you're going to lose your health care. That's freedom too. The freedom to organize for a good day's pay, for a good day's work, that's freedom. If there is a veil of mistrust between your family or neighborhood of color and your police department, you're not free. And you are not free if you're not able to make your own health care decisions. So we need to talk about freedom in its richest sense and not yield that to the other side. Big night in Dallas. I'm just thinking of that scripture that says, bless and do not curse. I'm just waiting to make sure everybody gets their chicken. Where was I? Oh yeah, scripture. Anybody else notice that scripture says an awful lot about taking care of the downtrodden? Anybody else get the sense that scripture says an awful lot about protecting the stranger? And it strikes me that stranger is another word for immigrant. I can't help but notice that scripture says an awful lot about lifting up the poor and the vulnerable and the sick. So let's not be lectured on the meaning of faith in this party. Okay, let's talk about security real quick. I think a lot about security because I put my life on the line in order to help with the security of this nation. But the reality is, in the 21st century, somebody has got to be there to talk about forms of security that can't be met with traditional means. Security that you can't look after just by putting a wall up from sea to shining sea. But let's talk about cybersecurity. Let's talk about election security. Let's talk about security in the face of rising violent white nationalism before it gets any worse. And yes, let's talk about climate security. I need to tell Texas that climate is a life or death issue. It's time to treat it like the security crisis that it is. Now, just for a moment, I'd like to talk about democracy. Because I think our party's called what it is for a reason. I don't think it's just a word. I think we believe that America is a more perfect union in as much as it becomes more democratic as we go. We would be more democratic if more U.S. citizens were able to exercise their legitimate right to vote. We would be more democratic if the Supreme Court were reformed so it were not a political football every time there's a vacancy. And at risk of suggesting something radical, I would argue that we would be more democratic if the way we picked our leader was just to count up all the votes and give it to the woman or man who got the most votes. So that's my bumper sticker: freedom, security, democracy. And I think with a message like that, I know with a message like that, we can reach people who maybe have had a hard time hearing us. And one of the reasons it's hard to hear us is because of that noise machine, that mesmerizing horror show that's going on in Washington. And I get that. It's hard to look away. It's hard to look away from what's being done to our institutions. And yet we have got to find a way to change the channel from that show. And the best way I can think of to do it is not to ignore the president, not to fail to challenge the things that we see going on that we know to be wrong, but to focus on a longer view, to remind Americans of what's at stake in the way this nation's going to look in 2054, the year that I will reach, God willing, the current age of the current president. Oh, it's fun hearing that sink in a little bit. I raise it because in 2054, America will sit in judgment over the kinds of choices we made in 2020. Whether we really did establish a more free, more secure, and more democratic union. But more than that, we're going to look around at our everyday lives, and we're going to ask whether they got better or whether they got worse because of our politics. And so I want to leave you with a little bit about how politics shaped my life from some of my highest and lowest moments. Like the moment I was packing my bags. See, that moment when I was packing my bags for Afghanistan for the purpose of defending that gentleman's freedom of speech, not to put too fine a point on it, but I believe at the time our president was focused on season 7 of the Celebrity Apprentice. One of the things you do when you're packing your bags is you write a letter. And you put it where your folks can find it if they need to. Mine says just in case on the outside. I haven't opened it since. But as I put that letter in a drawer, I realized that I could never again forget what was at stake in the American presidency, what it meant. The decisions that are made in that office and the way they affect so many lives in life or death fashion. And I felt it again on what might have been the toughest day in my life. A morning not too long ago when I found myself jumping into my car, leaving my mother's hospital bedside in order to get as quickly as I could across town where my father was getting his chemotherapy treatment. And the reason I needed to go find him right away was to tell him that she was going to need emergency heart surgery, not the kind of thing you put in a text. So I went out to find him and tell him in person. But as tough a moment as that was, and all the thoughts that were racing through my mind as I had my hand on the wheel, driving out there, I had a lot of things going for me. One of those things was faith. My pastor, who was at the hospital with her and other members of my family. Another thing I had going for me was Medicare. Because we knew that the finances weren't going to break our family. And as she started to get better and he started to get worse, agonizing over decisions that even as a mayor who makes decisions for a living, nothing could have prepared me to face. Even then, the only thing I had to make those decisions around was what was medically right for our family, not whether we were going to be bankrupt. That happened because somebody in one of those white buildings in Washington, D.C. made a decision that Americans would be free, at least when they reached a certain age, from being broken financially by a medical condition. I want that freedom extended to every single American. That's why we do politics. That's why we have politics. Campaigning and voting and dinners and speeches to make our everyday lives better at our greatest and most vulnerable moments. And it's what I think about when I remember that morning and the fact that the best thing of all that I had going for me was my husband Chasten at my mother's bedside, where he belonged, because in the eyes of the law, as well as in our hearts, he is my lawfully wedded spouse. Everyone here has their story about the ways in which your life was shaped by the decisions of people trusted in positions of power. No matter what your combination of reasons is, that's why it matters. That's why it matters that we vote. That's why it matters that we come back again and again, even when sometimes the result is not what we want. And I leave you with this, which is that running for office is an act of hope. Volunteering for somebody running for office is an act of hope. Enduring the speeches of somebody running for office is an act of hope. And so is writing a check and all of the things we ask you to do. All of the things we lift each other up in doing in our activism and our support for the causes that unite us as Democrats. And if you're ever wondering whether this is a season to be hopeful, with dark things happening in Washington and strange times come over the land, I would refer you to the cover of Time magazine, where tomorrow, if you feel like it, in a country where marriage like mine couldn't even exist 5 years ago, you can see a picture of a guy and his husband and the word first family. So I'm still betting on America. Do you not feel hopeful tonight? Are our values not the right values? Are you ready to put in the work to make sure that those values are vindicated on Election Day and every day? Then don't let anybody tell you we can't win. Blue state, red state, coast to coast, north and south. We can win. We will win. And I look forward to celebrating win after win with you. Let's get out there and get to work. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, at least we got $150 out of each one of those loudmouths.